Afternoon, Year 10. Right, as promised, here is going to be your revision video, and it will tell you everything you need to know about the biology topic we've just finished. Now, we've done this in quite a lot of detail, so this is going to be a sort of overview to guide your own revision, which of course will be many hours of in-depth study designed to meet your needs. So, the topic that we've just done is called responding to change, because as organisms we travel through this world and we bump into all kinds of different conditions, and a big part of not dying is making sure that you are able to respond to changes in temperature and like water levels. Obviously, if you need to not drown, you have to hold your breath. Light levels, we respond to those. We respond to pain as well. So that's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to break it down into a few different bits. First of all, we're going to talk about the nerves part of this, because our nervous system is very good at responding to change quickly. So we'll look at a reflex arc, okay, and we'll look at stimuli, what those are, and we'll look at receptors, and we'll look at responses. Right, when all that's done, I think what we'll do is we'll go and we'll have a look at some hormones, because that's another way of responding to change. And in particular, there's only two bits of this. We're going to look at human fertility, which is going to involve some truly awful drawing from me, and then we're going to look at plants. Okay, so let's get things started. Let's talk about nerves, and let's talk about a reflex arc. So I've got something prepared for this. Here we go. This is a reflex arc, and this is a diagram to represent it. And it looks really weird when you first see it, because what on earth is this very strange thing looking like some kind of, I don't know, either a butterfly trapped in concrete or something, I don't know. Actually, what this is it's a section of your spinal cord. So if you imagine a stick man like this, and he's looking very sad, because what we're going to do is we're going to chop him in half there, and if you then had a look end on at the spinal cord, you would see this. And the bit that's really interesting here is this sort of blobby bit in the middle. This is filled with what's called grey matter. That's basically made up of lots of nerve cells. It's part of your central nervous system, and that means it's able to process information about our surroundings. The other part of your central nervous system is, of course, up here. So your brain, that's part of your central nervous system as well. But there are two different bits to your CNS. Let's have a look at this situation here then. This guy has put his hand on a pin like a fool, and that's going to hurt. So we have some receptors in the skin, pain receptors, and you've got several thousand, if not millions, of these in your skin. And as soon as they are triggered by something hurting, they actually send an electrical impulse. So how do you represent an electrical impulse? As a little zappy symbol like that. Now these are going to travel up this specialised cell here. This cell is called a neuron, and it is able to literally conduct that electrical impulse, a bit like a wire would, I suppose, very quickly, all the way up the arm into the spinal cord. So it goes into the spinal cord through an area called the dorsal root. You don't really need to know that, but that's where it joins it. And it will join it somewhere in the sort of shoulder neck region, I guess. And the electrical impulse is going to travel in. And of course you need to process this. You need to do something about the fact that you've stuck your hand on a pin. If you leave it there for ages, you're going to bleed to death. So your spinal cord, this part of the central nervous system, is responsible for taking that information and very quickly bringing about a response. That's why we have reflex actions, so we can quickly deal with things. So in comes the impulse, and it reaches this little gap here. See how the red neuron there is joined to this white neuron here? Well, this red neuron is called a sensory neuron. I highlight that. Now, sensory implies that it's to do with sensing the world around you. This is taking in information about your surroundings. Now it's connected to what is called a relay neuron. Now remember what you do in a relay race. You spend ages looking behind you until the runner with the baton comes up, he hands it to you, and then in a few seconds you hand it on to somebody else. Well, that's what the relay neuron does. It spends ages waiting for the impulse to come in here. As soon as it gets the impulse, it fires along that relay neuron and it hands it on straight away to another one. All it does is taking the information and hand it straight back out to another neuron. And then in this case, the neuron is called the motor neuron. Now, motors make things move, and so do your motor neurons. They're connected to your muscles. So the impulse is going to come shooting down here, get into the muscles and make the muscles contract, so that this arm here is going to suddenly contract and move away from the pin. Now we call the arm, well in particular the muscle, the effector, because it's bringing about the effect, and the response is moving your hand out of the way. And you will do all this before you've even felt the pain. It's completely automatic. It is a reflex. You couldn't turn it off if you tried, and it will probably take you about 1/3 of a second to do all this. Why isn't it instantaneous, I hear you ask? Well, that's a very good question. In order to answer that, we're going to need to look at this point here where the neurons are almost but not quite touching. So here is our sensory neuron coming in with an electrical impulse shooting it along it, and when it gets to the end of the neuron, there's a little gap between that and the relay neuron. So here's our relay neuron over here, and there is actually a little gap there, and that's called a synapse. Now obviously our electrical impulse can't jump across that. Instead, when it reaches the end here, what it does is it triggers the release of lots of little chemicals. They come out the end of this, and then they drift across that gap like that until they reach the relay neuron, and as soon as they reach that, they trigger another impulse over there. Now, covering that little gap, it's a fraction of a millimetre, but it still takes a bit of time, and that's why your reflexes are not instantaneous. Okay. Drugs, of course, can mess around with what's going on in this gap. So if you take something like heroin, what it will do is it'll put chemicals in there that prevent the pain signals getting across, which is why heroin users don't feel any pain. If you take hallucinogens, what it will do is it will cause other chemicals to be released instead, that is what makes you see stuff, and see stuff that isn't really there. Okay, so that's synapses. That is the reflex arc. You need to know the bits. In particular, you need to know stimulus, sensory neuron, relay neuron, motor neuron, and the effector. Those are the sort of key bits there. Right, the other thing you need to know about is stimuli, or stimulus if we're only talking about one of them, and responses. And this is the easy bit. This is just a memory game, or common sense as I like to call it. Okay, if you think about the stimuli, there are loads of different things we have to respond to. Temperature is one. If it gets too hot, you sweat. If it gets too cold, you shiver. Easy. Let's think of another one. Let's go for a loud noise. This is a stimulus we often respond to. You hear something go bang behind you, you end up with increased heart rate, and we call this your fight or flight response. Okay. I'm not going to go through any more of those. You just need to know what the words mean: stimulus and response. And we have different receptors that detect these stimuli and bring about the responses we need. Okay, that's basically what I'm going to talk about with respect to the nerves. So let's say we've done that one and we're happy with that. We're now going to talk about hormones. Not entirely sure why that memo's appeared at the top. Let's get rid of it. Okay, so hormones are a different way of sending information around an organism. Neurons and nerves are very good, like electrical wiring, electrical signals, very quick, very precise, but hormones are chemical messengers, subtly different. And we're going to talk about one group of hormones in particular. We're going to talk about those involved in regulating human fertility. So here is a woman, obviously, and the different organs that we're going to be talking about are one in the middle of our head and a couple down here, and they are called the pituitary gland and the ovaries. And between them, these two organs control the fertility, i.e. the ability to have babies of that woman. And here's how the system works. The whole process is kicked off when a hormone called FSH is released. follicle stimulating hormone. Now the follicle is the part of the ovary where the eggs mature. So what it's saying is to the ovaries, get those eggs ready, okay? And that will go around the whole body, but when it's received by the ovaries, they go, okay, time to get an egg ready. And they will start maturing an egg in there. So let's just zoom in on that. Here are the ovaries. These are the immature eggs around here. But when it gets that message, one of those eggs starts to develop and get ready to be released for fertilisation. Now as this is going on, the ovaries produce a hormone of their own. The more FSH is produced, the more they start to make estrogen. Now, estrogen travels back up through the body until it gets to the pituitary gland. When it's up there, it says, enough. Because you don't want loads of FSH going around your body, because you'll keep producing tons and tons of these mature eggs, and you don't want that, because you don't want octuplets, you just want one baby. Okay, so this is what we call negative feedback. One hormone causes another to be produced, and that new hormone that's being made says, right, enough, let's shut that system down. Eventually, the amount of estrogen reaches such a level, there's so much of it building up in there, so loads of it going around the body, that this pituitary gland sends out a pulse of another hormone called LH. That stands for luteinizing hormone. And this word is weird, we don't really meet luteinizing anywhere else. So let's think of it in terms as the let's go hormone. Because what that does is it travels to the ovary and it says let's go to the egg, and this mature egg gets released out into the fallopian tube, travels down the fallopian tube into the uterus, ready to be fertilised. Okay, so boom, that's what the LH does. Now, of course, if there is no fertilisation of that egg, then it's obviously going to go to waste. The lining of the uterus will break down and pass out of the body in a period, part of the menstrual cycle, and the whole process will start again. If, of course, the egg is fertilised, then you need a nice thick lining of the uterus to nourish that egg as it develops into an embryo, and the levels of estrogen will stay nice and high so that the lining of the uterus is maintained. Right, you can monkey around with this, of course. Give a woman an enormous dose of FSH, and she's going to produce tons of eggs. Really useful for fertility treatment. Give a woman loads of estrogen, and she's not going to produce any eggs. They're not going to mature in those ovaries. Really useful for contraception. Now this means that women can kind of decide when they're going to get pregnant, which is quite a good thing in many ways. It also means that women who are 70 can decide they want a baby, and they can go and take a massive dose of this, produce some eggs, and have a kid well into their later years. You could argue the pros and cons of that at length to decide whether or not that's a good thing. Right. That's hormones in animals. Let's talk finally about hormones in plants, because they get hormonal too. And in order to do this, some more bad drawing. We're going to have a broad bean, a little bit like the ones that are currently germinating on my windowsill. Here we go, broad beans struggling for life. It's sent out a little root over there, and it's sent out a shoot over here. Okay. And the shoot's got to go and get the light, the root has got to go and get the water, otherwise this bean is going to die. So how does it know which way to grow? Well, that's where our magical hormone auxin comes in. The growing tips of both roots and shoots produces auxin, there and there. It's only that bit that produces it, but due to diffusion, it actually kind of spreads down either side. There we go, so there's auxin spreading out. Now, this shoot here is outside in the sun, which is going to be exposed to a lot of light. And light can break down auxin. What this means is that the auxin on the top edge is kind of going to go. There we go, so that auxin's been broken down. Didn't need to do that. And the auxin on the top edge over here has been broken down as well. So now what you've got are roots and shoots with only auxin on the underside. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because auxin has different effects on shoot cells than it does on root cells. On root cells, it sort of slams the brakes on. It says, look, don't grow anymore, don't grow any longer than that. The cells on the top, however, are free to grow as much as they like. Now, because they're getting longer and the underside is staying shorter, it forces it to curve round, downwards, as it would happen. Now, the underside here, in the shoot, does exactly the opposite. The auxin kick-starts the growth process. It says to those cells, right, get longer and divide, grow really quickly. The top cells, they haven't really got any auxin, so they're not going to grow as fast. So again, we get this asymmetric growth, they call it. It means that one side's growing faster than the other, and that causes it to change direction. And that's how it ends up growing in the right direction. Now this is a form of phototropism. Photo means light, and tropism just means moving in response to a stimulus, which in this case would be the light. But wait, I hear you say, what if this plant was in fact underground and it could not see the light? Well, this still would work, because not only do plants have phototropism, they also have what is known as gravitropism, which is the movement in response to gravity. Now in this case, you haven't got light breaking down the auxin on the top surface of the plant, but that's okay, because auxin is a really big chunky molecule, so that even if you do end up with any of it on the top here, that's going to tend to fall down, it's going to diffuse down to the other side. Any auxin produced up there will eventually sit on the bottom, and same over here, any auxin that's on the top of the root is going to fall down, so you're going to end up with the same thing. You're going to end up with all the auxin on the underside of the shoots or the roots. So even if there's no light, they'll still grow in the right direction. Take a plant up into space where there is no gravity, light it equally from every direction, and what you end up with is a very, very confused bean with the shoots kind of growing out in every direction and branching out, desperately trying to find out which way is up. And the roots, similarly, going crazy, thinking they haven't got a clue which way the down is going to be. And that's what plants growing in space look like. Boom. Okay, let's have a little look, check we've done everything I said I was going to. So, that's your bit on hormones. We've talked about human fertility, and we've talked about plants. Hopefully now you've got everything you need for your assessment. Good luck.